Jamie Campbell.
Yeah, right, you know where they grew up from Dibley and Vesuvius, I
Yeah,
think
presented, or
I
is
think
it
she's
just-
supposed to be.
Yeah, just a bit, we're on the west side, where Ellis and Old Yard used to be, right along the Roman River. I took my fly rod up there a couple Fridays.
There it
ago,
is.
The third cast.
Okay.
A little brookie
We're
one
on.
day. And then I was like, okay.
Welcome everyone to our City Council and Planning Commission joint work session this evening. I'm happy to welcome you and your participation. We'll begin with an invocation and pledge of allegiance by Council Member Stoker.
Our Father in heaven, as we are here this night to discuss plans and ideas for the city and things that are going on, we pray that we will be able to do so in a civil manner and come to agreements that is best for the city. We're grateful for this area in which we live in and our citizens, and we'd ask you that thou would watch over us all and say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Please stand and repeat.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first item is the consent agenda. Discussion or action to consider minutes from the June 25th and July 9th council meeting minutes.
Mayor, I make a motion we approve the consent agenda.
It's been moved that we approve the minutes from June 25th and July 9th by Councilman Turner.
Second that.
The second by Councilman Severie. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, motion passes. Next item on the agenda is discussion or action to consider an ordinance amending the North Ogden City Employee Personnel Policy. Presenters will be John Call, our manager and attorney, and Jamie Jones, our city treasurer.
So Jamie snuck in. She's over there. Jamie, why don't you pop up at the table for at least this part? Council, the wrong staff report was put in. It was the one from last time. So there's a revised one here on the table that goes through a point-by-point thing, and Jamie can walk us through it. There's only 18 changes that we made. Most of them are some legal things or minor changes, but there are a few that are a little more substantive, and so we wanted to walk through those. Jamie's the one who's did most of the work on this, and so we asked her to come in and present this, even though she's the treasurer and this isn't necessarily in her wheelhouse. She was happy to share the load, and so go ahead, Jamie.
Hopefully you guys read through it. Do you have the policy?
Yeah.
I didn't print it off just because it's so big. So we updated the personnel policy just to reflect a lot of the changes from the federal regulations and then also just URS. I don't know if we want to go page by page. Or
I just hit these highlights.
just, okay, okay. Just some clarification on the, I don't know what page you wanna go in. Actually, let's start with the organizational chart.
Okay.
Oh, no, it is here, sorry, I thought the org chart was first. Sorry. So this was, just to update our policy, regarding the Title VII and, federal regulations about protected classes. So we just wanted to update to include, just a little more verbiage about gender identity and expression, and then also, veteran status and whatnot, so. You'll see this 3 different times within the policy just to update that, so. So this is the updated organizational chart. We brought this, about a month ago, and talked about it. I don't know if you want to talk about this part, John.
So the idea, council, is where we don't or we're just clarifying who reports to who. For example, the city recorder reports to the mayor and council, just like the city treasurer and the city manager do. And then even though some people like Annette is the city recorder and our HR director, so she also falls in, it was already at the top. So human resource director reports to the city manager. So some employees that have dual roles report in two different chains. And that's just, part of the reason for that is, some cities, larger cities have them in different areas, but the idea is, like the treasurer and the recorder shouldn't have to report to the city manager. They should be reporting to the mayor and the council, because they're statutory positions. And then everyone else, reports through the city manager to the mayor and then to the council. So, we color coded it so that departments are the same colors because of the way it kind of spider webs out. So you can see the police here are here in blue. And we tried to include all of the various levels, various job descriptions in every situation. Parks is in red or Public Works is in red, and then we do a different shade of blue for Parks and Rec. Any questions about that, or did the council see any issues there? Okay.
Great. I believe the next one is in the definitions. We needed to comply with the URS rules regarding to elected officials and planning commissioners. And we basically needed to assign if they were eligible or not for URS benefits. And so we were just updating the definitions based on that. Can you increase that a little more?
Oh, yeah.
So are we eligible?
No. Unless you don't adopt this policy, and then we have to make some changes there. But this is what the policy is saying, is no elected officials are not. So another clarification is we just updated, just like city treasurer, city recorder, just kind of updating that verbiage there, so. Throughout this document, there were a lot of gender-specific pronouns that were used, and I don't know if you guys heard, but they're trying to change the Utah Constitution to get rid of those. His and hers, husband, wife, and just change it to spouse. That's supposed to come to the voters in 2020. But they just passed that earlier this year, and so we're just looking to update the policy to get ahead of that. So, again, I think that's the Title VII protected class. Oh yes, youth employment. We, I believe, John, help me. This came up in risk management, is this?
Yeah, our insurance, we have a risk management committee that our insurance representative from the company sits down with us, and this came up as a thing that the city needs to make sure we're enforcing, that we are employing enough individuals at 18 or older to drive the larger vehicles, and most of them do. We did actually end up, a good example is a 17-year-old can't drive one of our Parks trucks with a trailer on it, but they can drive one of the Parks trucks. So there was some confusion about that, and so we just helped clarify. It's based on a gross vehicle weight rating, that on what vehicles are allowed to operate at different ages. So they have to be 17 to drive, 18 to drive anything over a certain GWVR. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We talked about the title cleanups, putting city in front of the positions for the official title. The next one is the cell phones.
Yeah. Just trying to Should be in order. Sorry,
There were a lot of changes. It's probably another Title VII protected class.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you wanna?
So there was just some confusion about how cell phones were reimbursed. And this is just established that the mayor gets to pick that amount based on what the city's currently paying for. Most people who are required to have cell phones have city-issued cell phones. But there are a few employees who utilize personal cell phones, and they get about $40 a month to cover the cost of the phone and the cost of the plan. It doesn't cover all the cost, particularly because most of them are on, or we need them to be on a nationwide network. They can't do the local networks, and so it covers a portion, not all, but the mayor would be the one who sets that amount every year, or every time there's a question about the amount.
Great, thank you. Any questions so far? No, pretty? Okay. I believe the next few changes are probably just some cleanup as far as, just moving some duplicate information,
So like
yeah,
this section was stated twice in the policy, so we changed it so it's only once and in the most appropriate section.
right.
Okay.
And then we added some clarification on probation time for employees. Can you bring that? Oh, yeah, that was just another, one of those where we had it in a different section and then, just brought it down to where it's at the end, because it was duplicate, so. I can't read it.
I think, is this the, oh, that's not the right one, it's.
Oh, yes, so we needed to update for federal standards, we needed to, add some verbiage in there about, providing an area where nursing mothers can go to express milk, and also, one, to have a private place, and then two, to have, proper storage. And, also clarify that if additional break times were needed, that was something that the city was comfortable in providing, so. You wanna take this one was kind of.
So, this next one, council deals with break times and lunch periods. We have a few, departments that utilize their breaks as a lunch and instead of doing it every 4 hours. In particular, the Public Works Department has found that to be much more effective. That way, if they're eating and a call comes in, there's a break or something, they can get up and leave because they're on the city time as opposed to dispersing out to go forage for food in the community or other communities. And so this policy essentially lets the department heads establish what works best for their departments. The best example of this is police officers are always on the clock. As soon as they clock in till they clock out at night, they're paid for the whole shift. And this just allows for that to happen. Some departments will continue to do the standard, which is 15-minute breaks and an hour lunch for coverage purposes. But there are some who use the modified version that allow them to take a half-hour lunch and combine it with the break. And it just works better for their department. Does any questions about that, or? It's kind of on a department-by-department basis, and it hadn't been in the policy, but it had been allowed. And so we just were making sure that it was clear that it was allowed and no one was violating anything by doing it. It does say they can't take the break at the beginning of the day or the end. It's got to be sometime in the middle. So, yeah. Anything I missed, Jamie?
Nope.
Okay. So this is the comp time.
I believe this was another one of those where it was in another area. And so we just brought it up. And it made more sense in this area just to encourage that employees are taking comp time. We just wanted to make sure that the verbiage was the same in this section and then also the other section. So I thought I had a note on what section it was, but it looks like it might have disappeared. Maybe it's down in leave time or something.
Yeah.
So we updated the URS section, benefit section for retirement. Just basically saying that we are in compliance with the URS Title 49, and that the URS actually sets the contribution rates, and we took out where the city council sets the percentage rate. The city council just accepts the budget based on the URS number. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. We took out the verbiage, all of this. It was, to me, it was just noise. Because this is basically the ICMA RC loan policy that as an employee, if I were to take out a loan, I had to follow anyway. So I just, we felt like it was just more information to be in there that was unnecessary. And then just added that the employee takes out the loan has to abide by their rules, so. We just added pool passes for full-time and part-time, and then part-time employee, permanent part-time and part-time employees. This wasn't in there. I felt like it should be so that, well, it's clear and that the, basically that it's the taxes that are involved in there that we need to have in there, so.
More of the same.
Duplicates?
Yeah.
Okay. So this one is the mileage. I'll take this one.
So this one, council, essentially, there was some question about if employees were going to a training and it was in St. George, oftentimes they would go with their family and take their personal vehicle, and we're expecting to be compensated at the full IRS rate. And this is saying they get half the rate. The idea being that, you know, the city would have sent their own vehicle, but the spouses can't drive the city vehicles. So this allows the employee the option of taking a personal vehicle, but they don't get reimbursed the full rate. They get a portion which basically covers gas. It typically doesn't cover wear and tear. And then their spouses can take their car around because it's their own personal car as opposed to a city vehicle. And that, we thought we checked around and that was what several other organizations were doing, was half the rate. And it seemed to be fair enough. We do, if the employee was going to take a city vehicle and it's unavailable, then they do get reimbursed the full rate. So if there's two people with trainings on the same day, we'll send the city vehicle with the person who's going the furthest distance, and then the other employee would get reimbursed the full IRS rate because they didn't have the option to take the city vehicle because there wasn't one available.
So doing the 50% of the IRS, that's okay, federal and everything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's in another rule that you could just pay gas?
So if we could, instead of paying half, we could pay gas. And, but that, so that, if the council wanted to do that, we could bring back this as another change, but we felt like the half rate was easy to calculate and didn't require the reimbursement paperwork. Okay.
All right, I think the next one is the awards. For the Employee Service Awards and Recognition, these are things that we do that were not in the policy, and we just wanted to make sure that we include them. And then also verbiage about payroll tax purposes.
Yep.
And I think the last one, again, is just regarding youth safety. Again, just making sure that we have the list in there based on OSHA about what youth can and cannot do. Some of them apply, some of them don't. It's just the whole list that we decided to include in there, so. Right, well, we might get lucky one day, right?
Yeah.
What's the ordinance number?
2019-19.
I move that we accept ordinance 2019-19, amending the North Ogden City Employee Personnel Policy.
Been moved by Councilman Severing to approve city ordinance 2019-19, the city personnel policy.
Second.
The second by Councilman Swenson. Any questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Jamie, for your work on
Thank
this.
you.
Appreciate it very much.
John, is that okay on a voice vote, or do we need to have a roll call vote on an ordinance?
Oh, we should do a roll call vote.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Begin the voting with Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
Councilman Barker,
Yes.
Councilman Severing,
Yes.
Councilman Turner,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you for that clarification. Meeting is open for public comments.
Brenda Ashdown, 193 East Pleasant View Drive. Usually you just hear complaints from me, so today part of my comments are going opposite. I have checked out the website. I really like it. I think it's great. It's so much easier to navigate through. The only thing that I have a problem with is I wish that there was a community page where some of the things like where the lights were put up, and I don't mean anybody in the community, but like where the lights were put up was on the Facebook page, but that would be great if some of that kind of information could also be put on the web page. As far as this meeting is concerned, the last couple that I've been to, it's really dark when you go out to the parking lot. Some kind of a light out there would be great. You know, I pick up a paper and I know where I'm supposed to be better about using that kind of stuff, and I see that you have a North Ogden guest internet connection, but it's locked, so there's no way for us to get into it. That might also be nice to be able to do that rather than picking up a paper. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
My name's Lex Shaw. I live at 2885 North 750 East up there. And I'm an electrician by trade, so you have to forgive me about my public speaking, and I got some notes here. But I can help you with the light in the parking lot if you want. So I have a little bit of concern with the new policy on the additional structure over 600 feet in the size of it, and you have to be 60 feet from your neighbor's house or building. I did a little bit of measurement, and I have a half-acre lot. And with their lot, actually have to build this building 40 feet onto my lot, from the side and from the back. So I don't know if there's any addendums to this, or you can work with the individual homeowners, or if there's anything to work with besides just the blanket effect that would work for everybody. I know this has affected me and a couple other people with that structure. The kids are getting a little bit older, so I can actually afford to build a decent building on it, or an outbuilding, and put my RV in, or my truck in that, and the structure is fairly small, and so I just was hoping there's something we could work with or do with that. So, not sure if that's how that works, if you come back and you have an answer, or how it actually works with that, so.
Thank you for your comment. We'll
Thanks.
research that.
Oh, I just heard Rob say something about it.
Well, I was just gonna give you the business card, you can check with us.
I'll walk out there with you. Sure.
Lisa Arner, 3673 North, 800 East. I just keep forgetting to call, and so I'm wondering if, I don't like to dummy-proof too many things, but at the tennis courts, it's really hard to figure out how to turn the lights on. I know that sounds totally stupid, but don't laugh. They were on a few nights ago already, so then me and my daughter go out there and we're playing, and we were the last ones there, and I thought, well, you know, I don't know if they automatically go off, if we could maybe have a little sign made that just hours of operation, press the top one for on, or have to press and hold, because I tried to turn them back on to figure it out and I couldn't do it. So I didn't know, it was about 9:45, so maybe they don't let you, or do they automatically go off at 10? I don't know, it's just, a little sign would be really helpful on, kinda on and off and hours, and so, that's all. And it gets really dark out there too.
Thank you for your comment.
You ought to run out and grab Lex, he's an electrician.
I know.
See no other comments, we'll move on the agenda. Discussion of future of the 1700 North area. Presenter will be Rob Scott, our city planner.
He just walked out to give it this.
Go check and see if it's coming back soon.
Blake, here's your chance to sing.
Sing?
Sing before.
Sing.
You said that maybe we ought to have preludes, so now you can have the intro.
Actually,
While we're here,
Does this, yeah.
Blake, you might make your comment.
yeah,
Have an intro.
I actually have a comment.
Oh, you got a joke?
No, no, if I told jokes, they'd be so dumb, everybody, they're dad jokes. They'd be terrible. I just wanted to make a comment myself tonight. Last week in city council, a candidate for the 2-year position on the city council actually asked me to consider recusing myself from the vote of last Tuesday involving the detention basin. So I just wanted to make sure, John Call and I spent the next day on the phone talking about when it is not appropriate for a council person to be able to vote and not vote. So for clarification, there's 3 areas that would keep me as a realtor from voting on any kind of development in the city. First off, if it were my own personal development, if I chose to purchase ground and then I developed that ground, I would be benefiting directly. Therefore, I would have to recuse myself from voting. Second would be if the brokerage company that I work with, Best Realty Group and RW Custom, if they were actually building a development, I would have to recuse myself from voting. And then third, if, for example, a family member was actually doing a development, I would have to recuse myself because of relationship. It just happens to be that well, this next discussion with Rob Scott, it does involve property that has been in our family for 50 years or so. Property on South 17, the southwest corner of 1700 in Washington. So please know that I'm very careful about crossing that line, and quite honestly, I would never cross that line. My integrity is worth more than that. So please understand the conditions that involve me as a realtor recusing myself in city discussions. Any questions?
Thank you.
I got a question for John on that. The way I understood it as an elected official, if you declare like that he's a realtor and stuff, then he doesn't have to recuse himself. He recuses himself, declares himself as a realtor and says, this is the properties I own. He could still vote, but it's still in best interest would be to recuse. Is that correct?
So the statute can be a little funny sometimes. Typically, what most people recommend is if you are for sure directly benefiting, you should recuse yourself. But also, most elected officials, you should disclose any holdings and stuff in the city that would be outside of your personal property, where you live, that everyone knows. It's a conflict of interest disclosure, just to make it clear what's there. But there have been situations where people are loosely associated with a project and they do still vote on it. And that's why last week we mentioned that usually it's a judgment call of the actual person whether or not there's a conflict. Most people recommend when it's a direct financial benefit, they recuse themselves just to avoid the issues. Mhm.
Okay, Rob, you're on deck.
Would be all right if I sit down, please?
By all means.
This has been a heck of a month for me.
It just started. It's only been a couple days.
The past 30 days
Oh,
have been
okay.
very interesting, to say the least. So council and plan commissioners, we have two items with respect to property that is at the intersection of 1700 North and Washington Boulevard. One is the northwest corner, the other one is the southwest corner. First one we'll be talking about is the northwest corner. We have an application as part of the Village of Providence Point project to construct a combination convenience store and gas station, a 7-Eleven, at that intersection on the northwest corner. And we have can you see that? I need to turn the light out. That'll help a little bit. So this particular project, as you are all well aware of, started some 5 years ago. And as a part of that discussion for that property, there were a number of discussions made relative to the types of uses that should be there, what design considerations should be done. The city actually adopted a new ordinance called the Master Plan Community Zone to accommodate the development there. And of course, we've used it in several other locations around the city since then. As a part of that discussion, there are 4 housing types that were identified, and then commercial along the frontage of Washington. And the development agreement, it identifies specific standards relative to these various uses. And the commercial uses, what was produced at the time were some renderings giving examples of the potential for those buildings along the frontage of Washington. The developer did not have specific uses in mind at that time, but did produce those renderings as something that potentially could occur. And in the development agreement, if you look on page 2 of our memo here, it identifies some specific things from that agreement, and in fact, I think we've actually copied one of the pages from the development agreement associated with commercial. So, in addition to one thing I ought to make you all aware of, and that is that whenever there's a project at the Village of Providence Point, there's usually 3 applications that have to be processed for these. First of all, there has to be a subdivision approved. There has to be a site plan approval. And that site plan approval is actually, for commercial, is one that the city council is the land use authority on. So planning commission makes a recommendation, the city council ends up making the final decision relative to those. So as we go forward with these projects, these wend their way through our normal process. So an application is submitted. We typically have a technical review committee meeting. Those technical review committee meetings include the detail work as it relates to the infrastructure, any circumstances that are there relative to accessibility to sewer, water, those standard things that we have to have. In addition to that, the geotechnical soils reports and those kinds of things. And then also there are requirements that relate to the design side of the project. So what is, the applicant has given us a couple of schematics, building elevations and what have you. And what staff has done is compared those two things to the city ordinances and also to our general plan. And I'd like to share those because basically what it amounts to is how comfortable is the council and the planning commission with this particular project. The applicant does not want to spend a great deal of money on design unless there's, not that there's a guarantee, but a feeling that this type of project is one that you can support in the end. So let me, who's showing this? Is that you, Lynn, or is that?
It's me.
John.
It's John, sorry. So this is the building elevation of the proposed C-store that has been proposed. And then, do you have the other exhibit from the development agreement? The development agreement, as I said, had some retail elevations and with some very specific language associated with the eventuality of what do we want to see in this particular neighborhood or in this area at the entryway to the city. So midway through the second page, I've quoted the development agreement. The city envisions that the commercial development will be the southerly entrance to North Ogden with a prominent gateway building at the northwest corner of 1700 North and Washington Boulevard. The concept shows this building to be a statement building at the entryway to the city. It is 2 stories. It is oriented to Washington Boulevard. Then I've given you just a very simple review. I've extrapolated that from our technical review notes. It basically says that instead of a 2-story building, we're dealing with a single-story building. There's, the way the plan's shown, there's no entrance onto Washington, the way that the ordinance requires, and there's some other basic design things. We can go through those in detail if you want to. So with that, let me just remind everyone that the development agreement was something that was crafted as a result of a reference to our general plan. And on page 3, I've identified for you some of the goals for Southtown, which is the neighborhood that we're talking about, the commercial district. So the general plan calls for this area to be mixed-use development areas that combine residential, commercial, or office, commercial or mixed-use commercial uses with a direct orientation to the street sidewalk. These uses should have little or no setback from the public right-of-way. And they have reduced the front setback, and I believe it's 10 feet. So that's consistent with that. Other things, though, it also talks about creating design features that announce you have arrived to North Ogden. Provide a support function to the downtown. Consider additional height requirements in strategic locations such as corners that intersect with Washington Boulevard. Corner towers could create a recognizable theme that ties in with the downtown. Large corner plazas with distinctive features such as artistic signs could create a gateway effect for North Ogden. Address signage to improve appearance and create distinctiveness from standard suburban strip mall type development. And lastly, promote mixed-use housing concepts that add quality developments to the area and provide more rooftops to support businesses. So, as in all legislative matters, it's a judgment call. And it's something that you all, as a council and as a planning commission, need to wrestle with to determine, again, whether or not this particular project is consistent with what is included within the general plan, what's consistent within the development agreement, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
And counsel, the applicant is here. It might be appropriate to have him come up and talk about his vision, and I think also the realities of the commercial development world that he works in. So, yeah, so this is Ryan Forsyth with Leading Tech Development. Wherever that microphone there in the middle of the table will pick up almost anything in the room. So,
okay. So essentially, this elevation it doesn't show the colors very well at all. But essentially, where we know that this has to go through a big design process, I've been told that, and obviously I represent 7-Eleven and other developments, so they asked me to go to a corner because they economically can afford to go to that corner, which is what they asked me to do here. As you know, 7-Eleven's one of the more progressive convenience stores. They have stores in Manhattan, they have stores in downtown. They're used to different type of architecture. However, there'd been some concern that the concept in and of itself would not be acceptable, and I didn't want to go through a $20,000 design process prior to getting a big no. So take those with a grain of salt. Those are from a 7-Eleven that we're doing in Taylorsville, so they're not specifically designed for this corner. The colors that's calling out they're a lot different. We built the Beans and Brews, and that's the exact same materials as the Beans and Brews, which doesn't look like that at all. You can see, here's a couple of pictures of that. Here's a Costa Vida with the same color schemes that we're doing in Logan right now. You can see those, but I'll just hand them here. But essentially, 7-Eleven is willing and happy to accommodate as much of the architectural features that the city would like it, as long as it's financially feasible and safety is concerned. For example, I know one of the issues is a door located on Washington Boulevard. 7-Eleven, I was texting the representative as we were talking and saying, is that something that you're okay doing? And their problem is where it's a 24-hour store, it's a huge safety risk, having multiple entrances and exits. If it's faux entrance or something like that, it's fine. We can work around that and design that, but ultimately, the benefit that we would get by having the walkability would be far outweighed by the safety hazard that would be created from having that entrance. That's just the nature of a convenience store. Some other, as far as height, I know it mentioned 2-story. I don't think it would be feasible to do a 2-story building here. However, I don't think it would be a huge issue or a problem for us to design a much taller structure with some faux windows. I mean, obviously, budget is a huge concern and trying to make this doable, but I don't think that that's a deal killer for us if we needed to address height or some different architectural features. You know, that's totally fine as well. However, I know on the development agreement, the developer, he's in Alaska, there's a wildfire, he wasn't able to make it. He was the one that negotiated this agreement, and in some of the exhibits, it actually called out for a convenience store on this corner. It was anticipated, the site plans showed for that to be the case. I wish I had those, many of you have all seen it though, I'm sure, but it called out for a convenience store. And so his take is, look, we're happy to accommodate the look and the feel that North Ogden's looking for to an extent, but it just doesn't, you know, my concern is this use acceptable or is it not acceptable? Is this something that the citizens can get behind and the council can get behind? You know, I do think that it's a good use. You're putting 600 homes in that area. This is a great use. It's gonna service those homes. A lot of people probably would say that it wouldn't, but I guarantee most of them will use this. And that's the reality. I've built 230 Family Dollar stores in 230 communities. There are a lot of people that are very against. I remember going to Norwood, Colorado, and saying, think outside the box. There were stickers all over, and those people that were against it were not the vast majority of the people. There was a lot of people that were supporting that community that needed a place to get some laundry detergent and didn't want to drive 45 miles. And these commercial users are very, very sophisticated. They know when they're going to do well and when they're going to do poorly. They have this dialed down, and this is a good intersection. This is the right type of user, and for the land cost that is there, there's just not a lot of other users that make sense. There's the site plan right there in the development agreement that shows exactly what we're contemplating. And so that was the developer's point of view, is, hey, when we did this agreement, you know, this was what we knew would possibly come here. So other things, like I said, we're flexible. I want to make it look as nice as we can, but I wanted to get the council's opinions and thoughts prior to me spending a lot of money on design if the use was going to be shot down, if it was a problem with the use, or if it was a problem with, you know, those items. So I don't know if this is a forum where we can discuss and ask questions or whatnot, but I'd love to answer questions or discuss.
Yeah, so council, as you know, this is designed much more as a back and forth, and on a joint work session, you know, commissioners be as involved as you'd like to be. The only one that controls the conversation is the mayor. But I think that's I think that would be very helpful for staff and the applicant to talk about does the council, I mean, as was mentioned, this was the site plan that's in the development agreement. It shows a convenience store here on the corner with a island for pumps in the back. And then reconciling it, this is, you know, why the council makes the decisions and the planning commission makes the recommendations, is reconciling these other exhibits that are also in the development agreement with this document. And so I think we're here to answer questions, help you. I think it'd be helpful for the applicant to know one way or another, is the council opposed to the design, opposed to the use? What direction do you see this going in the long run?
Okay, so I'm not opposed to the use. I just want that, we talked about this I know it says this in the document stuff, but this is the gateway into North Ogden. The reality is it's on the south heading lane, so you're heading into North Ogden, it's not like that's the first prominent thing you see, you're heading north. Plus there's apartments on the other side, right there at that intersection. So I'm not opposed to the use, and I'm not opposed to not being, I like the design of that two-story that was in the design drawing, but I'm not opposed to playing around with the design a little bit to get something that would work better for that convenience store type use. So that's where I feel right now. Convince me differently. Go ahead, Ryan, convince me. No.
Oh, I'm gonna say, I'm not opposed to the use, like you said, there's a design where it shows a gas station there. I was gonna address the door on the street. As a safety issue, let me take the city council hat off, put on fire marshal. If there's a door, it's gotta be unlocked 24/7. So that's multiple doors. So I was gonna say, we need to work with them to take that door away. Otherwise, I have to have the same issue I have with Smith's where they lock their doors. And I get phone calls all the time about people complaining about locked doors. Chief Quinney will probably tell you the same thing. Don't put multiple doors on this building. It's a safety issue. Other than that, I have no problem.
So it's safer to go out no door than a locked door?
Nope, go out the door that, putting that frontage road, now the front of the building should be facing west. That's my personal opinion. If we're putting the access off the west side, then the front of the building should be facing the access road.
So you'd flip it 180 degrees?
No, he's got it flipped right on his design.
Their design already has it.
Their design has it facing west, but the development agreement says we need to have a door on Washington.
It's right here.
I'm saying that's not a good idea, in my opinion.
So this is the
Yeah.
current site plan. Sorry, it's a little slow when we get a lot of PDFs opened, it bogs the computer down.
Won't blame the computer for slow.
That's almost identical to the layout that was in the development agreement, except the pumps are they're turned 180 degrees because UDOT would not allow for a second access, which was,
And the development agreement shows a second access.
yeah, this development agreement shows a second access.
It's because it was too close to the intersection, correct?
Yeah. One other thing too, it mentioned offset, being up against the street. When we went to our TRC meeting, that was one of the only things that was mentioned, that it needed to be a 10-foot utility easement back of sidewalk, so that they're conflicting. You have planning standards that say 0 to 10 feet, and you have utilities saying don't build within the 10 feet. So it's kind of there's some things within, that need to be rectified and designed. So we went exactly 10 feet. But I actually would prefer if we're gonna be up on Washington, I'd rather be as far up to save room in the back as I possibly could. That's a small issue.
I think UDOT's 10 foot though, aren't they? Isn't it UDOT standard? Rob, do you know that?
I don't.
I thought UDOT was 10 or 11 foot back.
I don't think so.
I'm not sure about UDOT. I just know that at TRC it was that they had future utility lines planned back of walk. Which, I don't want my building being on a water line or a sewer main or those sorts of things. It could be a problem in the future. So either it needs to contemplate that these main lines are in the road and the buildings are on the sidewalk, or it needs to contemplate having an accessible place to access these utilities. And I can understand why it would be back of walk, because with that being a state road, it's a huge, huge undertaking to access those utilities.
And that's why we have 0 to 10 to account
Sure.
for the unique circumstances of every street
Yeah.
and where those utilities may or may not be located.
I'm pretty sure UDOT's 10 foot. It may be 11 foot.
Well, the fifth estate is the utility companies.
Yeah,
You know that.
that's true. Yeah, they're gonna do what they want.
So as far as access onto Washington and what have you, one of the key components that we're talking about here is, do we want a walkable area in our city? When you start taking away entrances and those kinds of things, you can kiss goodbye walkability. So just be aware that that's a real issue when it comes to these things. That's why those recommendations were put in there. That's why those standards are in there, is that the whole idea was to have Washington be not just a thoroughfare, but that would be a place where people could actually walk and access the various uses that are along the street, so.
Sure. And that,
just be aware of it.
Well, and that's one point we put, as you'll see, there's a planter and a couple of sidewalks to access around the building. You know, I think that, you know, I think that that helps, you know, a little bit. I get exactly what you're saying, but for the use that I've been asked to present, that was the way that I felt I could maybe help that.
So I just remind everybody where the walkability idea came from. That was from the outreach to the community of what should the future of North Ogden look like. In question, was that done effectively, or, you know, those things were brought up. But the answers that we got back at that time was a walkable downtown. So now we rejected the idea of form-based code, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't still keep those principles in mind to satisfy that. I'm in favor of having an entrance to Washington. I envision a time when the city grows and these little, you know, motorized things that kids ride around on increase, and kids are coming from all over the place down to old gas station to get a treat, you know, from developments a couple blocks away, and I think that'll be the main drag, how they're getting there. So I think an entrance on Washington is an appropriate thing. I think it's aesthetically pleasing rather than seeing the back of a building. You know, I've heard I work down in Riverdale, and I hear a lot of complaints about Mod Pizza and the habit in that development there, because it just makes a big ugly wall down Riverdale Road. So I think putting some glass towards Washington is a plus. I can't speak to the safety concerns.
Well, we can work with them. We can put a door in, but I'm just gonna let you know, they'll lock it at 9 o'clock at the latest and make you go to the front, and then we'll get complaints. I get complaints almost weekly between all our stores.
You know, it's a door made out of beads.
Well,
okay. My bedroom had it.
Well, they can, Smith's locks one of their doors, and 7-Eleven they would do the same thing.
The honest reality too is this is serving to the west so much more than it's serving north and south, with those new houses going in. And I do agree, I hate the look of the Mod Pizza on Riverdale. I mean, but part of that is what the code is telling us to do. I mean, as developers, the way that I would interpret your code as a developer is exactly what they did at Mod Pizza, is close up to the problem. Here's the problem. It's like a fight between two things. The restaurants that are doing well are drive-through restaurants, which require a loop around. If you're building up on the street, you have to do a loop around. They're doing so much better. You see Olive Gardens and Chili's almost filing for bankruptcy, and all these different people. Or you have a whole bunch of people that are ultra trendy, not fake people, but businesses that are ultra trendy, and the only thing that's worse than having nothing is having big empty spaces that have no vacancy. The one thing that I can tell you is you have a lot of power with the design, and I'm happy. I'm clay in your hands. You know, as long as I can afford it, I'll do it. However, 7-Eleven has staying power, and I do think that they will be there for 50 years. I think that if you haven't been through a new one, actually I'm sure you haven't, because the first one of this new prototype opens tomorrow in Syracuse. It's on SR 193 in 1000 West. I'd love you to go look at it. There's one out on Larson Lane and 1900 West that's under construction right now. I'm building one in Brigham City on 1100 South Main Street that's about done. I would welcome any of you to come up, look at the insides of these stores. They're nice, open, tile work everywhere. It's really nice. They're good, nice stores, and they're doing a good job. So I do think staying power is an important factor. You know, I'm from Brigham City, and I've said this before. My dad owned a store, Christensen's Department Store on Main Street, my whole life growing up. And Main Street's empty, you know. The reason I kind of, you know, don't buy into the same thing is I watched my family business that had been run since the 30s change in the 90s. And we went out of business, you know. We had to convert to an auto-driven society. And people would drive to, no matter how good a deal my tennis shoes were in Brigham City, they'd drive to Ogden, you know. It was just the way it was, and so, you know, anyways, any other thoughts or concerns that I could help with?
John?
Yeah, our monitors are being fun today. So now they're not talking to each other. Let's see if I can.
I'm just thinking that design is gonna be a big deal in this situation, because I mean, I look at the renderings and it's a square brick building.
Yeah.
And that's not a gateway building, you know, and so, the use I'm not necessarily opposed to either, but I think it's gonna be pretty important that we get something that everybody's happy with on the design.
So I guess I would love some direction, knowing that my big points that I can't get around are a door on the backside. That will be a deal killer for me. A second story, I've heard in the past, a second story, I think we can make it taller like the car wash, but I don't think a second story in that location would be, I don't think I could make it pencil. Those are two major things for me. Setbacks I can play around with, elevations and design I can play around with. But what's some direction that you would see me going?
What about orientation of the building? With the building in that orientation, I think it's gonna be hard to create any kind of a statement or impact frontage on that, you know, on that south side there. It's so narrow. What if the building were rotated clockwise 90 degrees? And I don't know if you have to have the islands visible from the front or anything like that. But I mean, that's one of the questions I just wrote down here, you know, is this a statement building? Does this announce your arrival? And I think there are things architecturally that could be done, but not in this orientation.
Yeah,
So if that building were flipped down here and the islands moved somewhere so that back side could have a facade or whatever to make it look like, I think you could come closer to making it look like a statement or an announcement.
So council, we've lost the connection here, which is kind of nice because that'll stay up, but I'm gonna be showing things behind me. This is a gas station in Brigham City or in Logan. And I'm not saying I like it or I don't like it. I'm just saying this is an example of a corner gas station, but you can see it's a false. That's not an entrance. It's designed to look like one, but it isn't one. And in fact, the entrance is on the opposite wall, you know, over by the pumps, which you can see in the background. So that's, but, and I'm not saying this again is a statement building or it isn't, but it has features that draw you to the corner.
Well, that looks better than just, you know, a rectangle building with a wall on it.
Well, just so you know, right across the street of that is a real traditional looking gas station.
Another Maverick.
Yep, right there. It's actually now Maverick, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually really like that store. I have no problems with that at all, coming up with something like that.
With this, you mean?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Yeah. That's something that could be done.
Would you have enough space on this
The only
piece of land to do something like that?
The only issue, I agree with your point, but the code reads that we have to have a certain percentage of building along the property line on Washington, which that creates the issue. And this doesn't even meet it, just in fair disclosure, it doesn't meet it. we also would need to move the dumpster somewhere else, which is fine. Originally, in order to try to meet this width on Washington, we were thinking, well, can we build the dumpster into a faux wall? I mean, we were trying to think of everything we could because when you have to have enough room to fit a tanker in on your property, all of a sudden your building becomes 130 feet long to meet those standards. So there would need to be some sort of variance with how wide the building was along Washington on the frontage as well. One thing we thought of to fix that is the developer wanted to shave off a corner and do a large monument sign that would be advertising for the whole development, which would be a separate parcel, which would minimize my frontage on Washington and also provide some sort of a gateway look. I'm fine with that too.
Something like this would be acceptable?
Yeah, I like that. I have no problem.
So I was late to the game. I missed the whole first part of your discussion, but did you guys already discuss rooftops? And I mean, because what's appealing to that isn't necessarily the shape of the building, right? Like an L. There's nothing aesthetically pleasing about that to me. Yeah, it's the pitch, the pitched roof and the colors, the glass in the front. I think that makes that look welcoming, not necessarily the shape of the building. So I think if you get going down that road, I think I would put those kind of conditions on that.
I like awnings. I don't mind the faux glass or the faux approach. I like that because it's a corner entry. You know, I've done those before. But yeah, I mean.
So just a reminder, council and planning commissioners, the MPC zone allows for modifications, they're not variances. But what it does do is it requires that the applicant put together their best shot at it and then identify where they do not meet those standards. And then as part of your deliberation, then you have the opportunity to weigh whether or not those modifications are appropriate or not. But it's up to them to work with staff to make sure that those are all identified.
So maybe I missed something, but you could do something like this on this corner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it may be true that it's on the, west side, but something like that is obviously much more of a, kind of a statement.
Yeah.
Welcome to North Ogden, even though again, it's on the west side.
Sure.
But I would love to see something similar to that on that corner if you would have enough space to ensure, the tankers being able to come in.
Yeah.
And so forth.
I think that if you look at a lot of the new 7-Elevens, Maverick has a theme. It's a outdoorsy wood 7-Eleven. These new 7-Elevens are not. They're more square. So instead of maybe cornering off the building, I would build up a parapet, square on the. I would be willing. I mean, if it was acceptable, I'm happy to spend the money to start designing. I just didn't want to do so when there was so much pessimism about the use and because it is expensive and it takes a lot of time.
And council, there again, as was mentioned, the walkability, positioning the building in a different location that allows for an entrance closer to the sidewalk as opposed to on the opposite side of the building might be beneficial. Councilman Swanson talked about turning the building but then you lose maybe some of the corner. And so it's going to be a process to, if this is the direction that you want to go, how do you make it work? Part of the reason staff has been, I don't want to say unenthusiastic about this, but really trying to be honest with the developer to not get their hopes up was there's not the convenience store doesn't match all the boxes in the development agreement, and so there's a lot of ground to work to get there to make it fit. And so we've just tried to be realistic with the developer and then also bring those things to your attention in the development agreement, the walkability, the frontage, the setbacks and things like that. So.
And one thing too, the developer and I have been, we went with a couple of different restaurant concepts to go north on, next to the building. I think we have one that's very interested and a couple others that I think are really good options that I'm excited about. I think if the whole 2 or 3 acres was looked at on a whole, we might be able to be greater on the other parcels as far as how much frontage is on Washington per square footage or whatever, or linear footage. But it does make it more difficult on 7-Eleven because of the tanker, because of the fact that it is meant to fuel automobiles, and there needs to be a certain number of, there's gotta be turning radii, and there's gotta be things like that make sense.
You may not have the answer to this question, but what happens with the old 7-Eleven?
I hope that they would coexist. I mean, obviously, the franchisee's here, so.
I think.
I'm here for another 3 or 4 years anyway. Then I have to renew.
No, I thought he just said 50.
No. The store's been there for 30, how many now? I have, if I could make a comment on that, if you could take and face that west, I mean, you've already got a setback with my store, you got a setback with the Maverick. Why not at least allow it there? Now, the roof line that you have on that development, that tall peak, they can do that. All they gotta do is raise the roof in the center, and they can give you that statement look. But that would mean that the building would be facing out to Washington. They put the gas at one end or the other. I mean, that's just, I look at it from the operator's standpoint, and I wouldn't want the back of my building, no matter how well you dress it, to be out there on the highway. I want people to see the front of the store.
Well, to be frank, I mean, so does 7-Eleven, corporate.
And as far as that escape door, that we have one on the north end of my building, you run down that hall and you hit that crash bar and you can go out. It's locked, it's secure, but there's a crash bar on it, and you can get out. If you gotta get out of that store that way, you can't go out the front. There's no way out.
Where's your building at?
Right down there on the corner, 7-Eleven.
Oh, the 7-Eleven, yeah, that's right.
I've been there for the last 7 years. But the store's been there for 32 years now.
Well, 7-Eleven obviously would prefer being oriented the other way. However, I told them up front that these were issues, and they tried to make their, I told them this is what it was gonna be, and they agreed to it. They still thought that the rooftops to the west that are coming in, that's part of what you said in the plan, more rooftops, and that provide for businesses to serve those rooftops. This is a very, good use of that. But I think that the way it's oriented right now is fine. I mean, we've got past that, we've got that approved through them. I think because of the way the access is, to be honest, it's not gonna be horrible, because UDOT's not gonna allow access only every 400 feet or something. It's kind of a far access, far point of access anyways.
So apologies for making you repeat this, because I think you guys covered this, but why is the door to Washington a deal breaker? Was it functionally, or is it a cost thing?
Security.
It's not a cost thing, it's a security thing. I mean, honestly, I don't think, I mainly build, auto parts stores, tractor supply stores, some restaurants, 7-Elevens, Family Dollar, Dollar Tree. Nobody wants multiple points of entry into a building.
Is it someone steal something and
Yeah,
is it
it's
theft?
steal something, it's theft, it's not being able to keep an eye on things, it's that, and especially a 24-hour convenience store, which is something that we would have to discuss as well, and city council would have to approve. I think, John, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a conditional use, right? We have to get a 24-hour approval.
I don't remember,
No.
Rob's shaking his head, no.
So 24-hour, usually you're in there with one person through the nighttime. They just don't want multiple points of egress and ingress. It's mainly a safety issue.
Thanks.
I
Well, I would
think-
suggest, council, if you can't get a door, then you at least get the facade of a door, meaning you get glass. And, you know, we talked about that with Auto, when AutoZone came, we couldn't get, we wanted the door to face 2600, and we didn't get that. But we did get them to wrap that side minimum, that you get, that's Brandon's opinion, okay? That you get glass on Washington, and you get roof lines and facades that dress that building up, and then if it comes in sexy enough, then you can make whatever concessions you have to with the builder. That's my take. If you're getting what you want out of it, right, then you can have a little give and take with them. That would be. Right, so if they come in with a sexy building,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Then, you know, I think that they can play with the code with what leniency they have. That'd be my take.
And council, remember that in the development agreement, you essentially have absolute say. Like Ryan mentioned, you know, he's Clay and you are the Potters, right? So, you know, what the city requires, Ryan and 7-Eleven will sit down and say, can it even be done financially? And that's kind of that's why we're here having this discussion, so that we can make that decision sooner than later, so there's not a bunch of money thrown away at a project, you know?
Has use already been heavily discussed? Have you guys put that to bed already? Was that?
You came in when we started talking about it.
Okay, because my thoughts that way are, a marketplace sounds like a great use for this space. The industrial portion of a fueling station doesn't. Okay, I mean, it doesn't in relation to the living quarters right there, all those apartments and condos and stuff, right? And would you really want people fueling up in tankers coming that close to your home? I would say no. When I think about in relation to you've already you've got a tire store, right? And then a car wash. Does a gas station fit there? I kind of think so. But I envisioned this as being more of a couple eateries and maybe the market. I didn't necessarily think gas station when this was being batted about a couple of years ago. But it does come with a market, which I think is a benefit to the area. So again, I don't have a 100% of an answer there, but I do think the C-store is nice use. I just, you know, the gas, especially where they're gonna have to pull in, they're gonna have to go over there right next to all that housing to pull their tankers in, and, you know, at what time of night and how late are people gonna be there. And remember, you know, you sold this to the town as a, you know, this place to be, right? And if you make it too industrial, you know, we may do ourselves a disservice. And I don't have a great answer for you, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, the light of it might be an issue too. I mean,
sure,
they're very well lit usually, and if
Sure.
I've got an apartment that's sitting right up next to that, I'm not gonna love
There was
that
a-
light all night long.
It's for sure facing that way. I mean, you know, that's part of the that's a argument for turning the other way, but.
This was like, what is it called, 3 fountains or 3? They had the same concern, right, with Maverick going in. It doesn't seem to be, without Maverick's facing the other direction,
Yeah,
right? And I don't live in 3 fountains, I don't know, but every time I go down there, I try to perceive how those people are impacted by this. And other than there probably are people right next to them at 2 o'clock in the morning now, it doesn't seem too bad, but.
Other comments from the council?
Mayor, can I make a comment?
Sure.
As a staff member. It seems like this idea up here on the screen is like pretending to be walkable or to look walkable when it really isn't. And what we've been doing on these properties you know, the idea was walkability, but the uses that we're approving are really auto-oriented uses, which the council is, you know, has the power to do that. My feeling is if we're going for auto-oriented uses, then we let go of the walkability. If we're really not going to make it walkable, then let's not pretend. Let's make it auto-oriented, make it look good. But for me, I would rather see the other side of that building where there's life. You actually see people, you see things happening. When you enter the city, I would rather see people and life rather than the back of a building where there's no life. So I think it would be good to make a decision of, are we going walkable or are we not? And if not, then let's make it nice, but make it suit the purpose. So
I don't think anybody's gonna stroll next to a car wash for just a nice little walk, right? The problem is it's a thoroughfare, and somebody's gonna wanna get from this development to the one maybe on the other side of the cannery, and then it's inevitable.
Naturally, I love what you said, because naturally, I've said this in past meetings. You know, when I went to the University of Utah and studied urban planning, and then I also studied Masters of Real Estate Development degree, which talked about the finances, you know, I mean, how to make this actually happen and how to bond this together. Then I went to law school and I learned about, you know, what can be pushed and what can't be, and laws and this and that. I think that the reality is you do have to make that decision. And when you're looking at walkability, you've got to look at neighborhoods. You've got to say, okay, this is a user for this neighborhood. This is going to be so much more walkable for the 600 homes to the west of it. It is not going to be walkable along a 32,000 per car day, per day street, you know. And then you've got, you know, in a planning, the way that I studied planning, it was, okay, let's have these businesses to service this neighborhood, and then these bigger hub to service these neighborhoods, and then this one to service these neighborhoods, and it was bigger. I think the problem is, you know, this is only 2.5 acres of commercial space. It's not big enough to create something that's going to attract this neighborhood. It's going to attract this neighborhood, you know, and it's going to, and the users of this neighborhood, you know, you have to think about that. I love the ideas. I'm totally unopposed to making it look grand. I get that it is the beginning of your city. But your city is also a suburb of Ogden. It is, the vast majority of those people come here to live away from downtown next to Temple, or else they buy one of those condos right next to Temple and walk to here and there. I mean, and so I think in all reality, the vast majority of the people, if you surveyed the people who live in North Ogden, they are driving to work, they're driving to dine, they're driving, and I still think that we should give them as much as we possibly can to not make them drive, but it's not enough ground to justify, you know, 21st and Washington or whatever it is down there. It is going to be smaller, more local, and it's going to be a great service, but it's going to be a service to a smaller. You've got a Maverick 10 blocks to the north that's serving that neighborhood. You've got, you know, and so it's not really going to be driving a whole bunch. I mean, I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Agreed, but the counterpoint is, it's got to start somewhere. Like if you let everything come in with a thought of not walkable,
sure,
you're never going to get it, right? Like, everybody has to play ball, and you have to start enforcing that principle sometime. So that, you know.
I totally agree, yeah. So
you got to figure out, is now the time you're going to start enforcing it, or are we going to keep going? And then there's nothing necessarily wrong with auto-friendly, right? I'm not saying either is intrinsically good or bad. What do you want this area to be?
You know, I think that if this was going west, it would be a great place to be walkable. If there was enough rooftops to the west, that it would make a lot of sense, but it's just along one of the busiest streets in northern Utah, you know? It's hard.
So Brian, have we given you enough?
Yeah, I guess so. I think based on what I've heard, if I can make this sexy enough.
My term, not yours.
Your term.
I want
yeah,
that.
not mine.
Trademark.
Trademark. The use is not a deal killer.
I want to say, before you go further, though, that I'm not enamored with the use.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean I can't be convinced otherwise, but, I mean, from the moment we first heard rumor that it might be a 7-Eleven, that wasn't what I envisioned, as we negotiated with Village at Prominence Point and that business. And again, I'm not saying, you know, a hard and fast, absolutely not, under any circumstances, but, you know, if I had to make a decision right now, I would say, no, I don't like that use for that corner. So I just want you knowing that as you know, try to make it sexy and those things, make it Brandon sexy.
Pretty sexy.
Make it what Brandon says, yes.
I think those are just my thoughts. You know, the council's the voting body on this, right?
Sure.
I'm one of 5 recommenders.
So I guess the other items that I think for 7-Eleven would be a deal killer would be access straight onto Washington from the back side of the building. If that is something that can be worked around, then it would be worth starting the design process. And actual 2-story building, I don't think would work. But other than that, I think we could, you know, we could do a lot to make it look the part. But I would, I know that there are gonna be not, I don't know whether Rob said it, but not, concessions would essentially be, I know the concessions for me are gonna be a door, 2nd story, how much building is adjacent to Washington, linear footage, you know, that percentage. And that's about it. All the rest, we are happy to.
How much space, and just to follow up on that, they're called modifications.
Thank you.
And the point is that it's your opportunity to present something that ultimately they can get behind.
Sure.
So tonight is not the appropriate time to make any kind of commitments as far as those 3 requests or whatever. But I think that everybody's on notice that those are your concerns. Your challenge now is to go out, take a look at what the standards are, coming up with a design that, in your opinion, meets that intent for this project, and then we'll start running it through the process.
Yeah, I appreciate it, but however, it is an extremely expensive process to get it to that point. And so if it was gonna be, that was my main point in you know, doing that. If we can, I know it's not important how much money it costs me, but I am trying to invest in your city, as proven by what I've done. I feel like I've put a lot of money into this city with AutoZone, Beans and Brews, now O'Reilly's, helping that corner. So I'm trying to just get a feel for if this is doable, because I don't want to waste, but I owe it to my client 7-Eleven to give it my best shot.
Well, we have a long list of things that you're to provide us. But in terms of the basic design things, you can focus on those 3 things. We can move those things along to get a decision point before you spend money on all the other rest and other aspects of the design. Okay?
Fair enough. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. It looks like there's item B, discussion on property south of 1700 North.
Thanks, Mayor. We just talked about the northwest corner. Now we're going to talk about the southwest corner of 1700 in Washington. I knew I was going to get that wrong with that look, council member. But
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off.
that's all right. Hey, I was approached here about a couple months ago, I think. Isn't that about right? Yeah, a couple months ago, by Terry Severin, who owns frontage along 1700 North and that corner. And he asked me what my feelings were relative to a use which was to establish some storage units along that particular property and what have you. And I went through much of what I've recounted tonight with respect to the purpose of the MPC zone and so forth, and we had a good chat about that. Planning Commission back in the 1st of August had a discussion about the pros and cons of that specific use as well. But so let me just get the general plan.
Yeah, it's just gonna take me a second to look over my shoulder. So I've got the future land use map.
Yeah. Hold that up.
Yep.
A little bit or not, but. Does that help? Everybody? So, here's 1700 North, and of course, when the general plan was put together, 1700 North had not been extended, so our general plan shows a number of different uses, and this, of course, is the Village at Prominence Point. This is the property that we're talking about here relative to this circumstance. One of the key components of this is that this area right here that I'm outlining is within our boundary declaration, but it's not annexed at this point. And over the time that I've been here in the city, I don't know how many that I've talked to about, gee, it would be great if somebody could start acquiring all this land so we could have a design that integrates all of these properties. You can see that especially along Washington, we have a lot of small frontage, small parcels of land along here. And just what is going to be the best way to accommodate getting something that is going to be a integrated design for this entire neighborhood. So you can see that on the frontage here, the discussion, or actually in the neighborhood, it calls it a property as a mixed-use multifamily commercial with some low-density residential on the western edge. That's what it calls for. So as you can see on this, we have low-density residential to the west, have some kind of mixed-use kind of a designation here. Well, what does that mean? Well, I guess that's what we're here to figure out, whether or not the idea of having storage units is something that is appropriate to this or not. Now, one of the things that is kind of funny is history, if you haven't figured that out. But if you were to come in and ask me today, can I get a building permit for storage units, you know what my answer would be? No. Why? Because we don't allow storage units in the city. How did they get there? Good question. I don't know the answer to that question, but John's going to be talking to you about updating our ordinances. That's one of the things we need to update is our use list for sure. In any case, the question is, in starting to look at individual pieces and what have you, how do they fit into the whole? And it's difficult to have one property owner say, gee, I don't want to be held up and I'd like to move forward with something. At the same time, how do we integrate that piece so it's not totally a piecemeal approach to each one of those properties there? So that's what we're here to share with you. I have given you very much the same guidelines from our general plan that I repeated earlier are appropriate and applicable to this particular property as well.
Rob, is the piece we're talking about that kind of flat open piece that it's larger to the west?
It goes all the way to here, if I remember right.
Oh, so it's that whole big rectangle. What is that little singular piece right there along Washington? There's a smaller rectangle embedded in there. Right, no, go to that top piece. Right there, that little piece right there. Is that a separate
It is.
parcel?
It is.
Same property owner?
I don't think so, no. He's saying no. It's a different property owner. You'll get your, lots of opportunities for you to share your thoughts. Any questions more for staff, and if not, then we can turn it over to Mr. Severin, and he can share with you what his kind of thought process has been relative to all of this. Here, I guess Mr. Severin's on. Unless you have something else you want to chat about.
Yeah, I'm Terry Severine. I'm the part owner of that parcel right there. That second piece you're talking about is not part of our property right now. It's just that 8.5 acres that goes to the west. What I'm looking at right now is starting on the west side of that, which is about 500 feet approximately from Washington, and it would give me about 6 acres there to build my storage units that I'm looking at building. I haven't decided, when I was in the planning commission, we talked about the future use of the piece continuing to Washington. I said if it goes well enough and I need to expand, I would expand onto that, but I would look at it in a light to where it would be more of a pleasing looking building like you guys have been talking about, the C-store. But as of right now, I'm just looking at the 6 acres to the west, putting a nice block wall around the facility for security rather than chain link fence, and building some climate controlled storage units as well as traditional storage units.
And maybe I can just throw one thing out. Again, this property hasn't been annexed into the city. And so as part of any potential annexation, the city really has a lot of flexibility with respect to what is acceptable in terms of uses, designs, et cetera. So you've got lots of opportunity to weigh in on whether or not any use is acceptable or not, and under what circumstances.
The other thing that was fleshed out in the planning commission discussion that I didn't know, so maybe this may be news to you guys, was a climate controlled facility is an indoor thing. It's a building, you go inside and there's hallways and then like a
storage units inside that building.
Right, like a mausoleum.
So they're basically,
or something, like, right?
heated and cooled throughout the winter and summer so that they can keep documents or whatever they want that's gonna be more, what are you trying to say? Like documents that they would want to keep rather than in a regular storage shed. It's gonna get freezing and stuff.
So it's not gonna have the big industrial garage doors and things?
On the outside,
right. It's gonna be you
Traditional.
walk through a door and.
Yeah.
Or would there be a?
I had some pictures of it, but when I went to get them this morning off of the thing, I don't know what happened to them. I was gonna bring some pictures of what I'm proposing to do, so.
So some of these weren't even
But I'm
multiple
looking
stories.
more, right now, I'm kind of in the same stage as, I'm looking to get kind of the tentative approval or get an idea that this could move forward so that I can start my feasibility study to make sure that this is something that's gonna, because I don't wanna go ahead and spend that kind of money to build it and find out that it ain't gonna work in that area. And I don't wanna propose it to you guys and find out the same problem, or I mean, come to you and say, get the approval and start building, find out, so, because there's, I'm gonna do a complete feasibility study, make sure everything's gonna work properly. But I'm just kinda looking for guidance on if this is something that you would be willing to allow at that end of the.
Where does that fit in with the subdivision that was going in that annexed area? Scadden's.
Oh, Cooperstown, that's further up here.
It's actually at the very bottom, Rob, that bottom red piece.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
John, do you have your pointer?
Sure.
And as we discuss this as a plan, you guys chime in if I get this wrong, but we batted this idea around for 40 minutes or so, and discussed, should this be an allowable use in the city of North Ogden? And if so, should it be in this area, right? And I think for me personally, my initial thought was, no, storage units are ugly and we don't want that as you drive into North Ogden. I believe the planning commission as a whole softened on that idea as we talked it around it, and kind of came to the idea that as long as there was an appropriate frontage, be that on Washington, and in this hypothetical situation, be that on Washington or even on 1700, as long as there was the appropriate frontage with, vegetation or aesthetically, if it looked fine from the street, what's so really bad about a storage unit? That's kind of where we landed. Is that, more ugly than any other type of building or development? And so we became more comfortable with it, I think, with that. Am I saying that correctly?
And there was.
There were concerns, definitely.
Was there a little space of land on the corner, though, that we thought maybe we could put something next to it that was a little bit different, possibly? Like you could sell it to a commercial.
Oh, yeah,
like-
up there on Washington Boulevard.
Like a
See-
Jamba Juice, I'm
See,
just
I'm still gonna
trying-
be, like I said, my storage units are gonna be starting 500 feet to the west.
Right, so on
And then
that
if we,
corner.
depending on how my development goes, if whether I use storage units or we sell it to somebody that's, I've already been approached by somebody that they're looking at, wanting to build an office complex there on that corner. And that may or may not be something that we're, at this point, we're looking at doing some kind of a business office complex on that corner.
Terry, I want to make sure that I'm understanding the pieces that you're talking about. So when you say 500 feet, you're starting here?
No, it'd actually be
Over here.
starting roughly about, oh, God, I hate this one because I can't really see it that well.
You're right there. Turn off the
Okay,
light
so the
there.
flat lot, wherever it comes in here, I'm gonna be coming somewhere right about here, so it'd be this, all the way back to this section.
So about there, all the way over is what we're talking for
Yeah, that
storage
would be-
units.
This would be all the storage units. Right here at the very beginning would be a two-story, climate-controlled building in that part.
Okay.
And then there'd be the
So
rest.
all of this out here is outdoor storage? Your
Yeah,
traditional
the-
storage,
yeah, the
outdoor storage?
majority of it will be the traditional outdoor storage.
Okay,
So
so-
like I proposed, or like my vision of this is I want a block wall all the way around it for security. And I want to put a really nice looking block wall. It's not just going to be just a black, regular cinder block, but the decorative cinder block or something along there. Yeah, this is kind of a little bit better because there's a house right here now with the garage. Be about right here is where I'd be cutting off to come back. Sorry about that. Oh, there you go, that's better. Now, my old eyes can see it. Yeah, so right about in here would be from here to the west.
So among the things we discussed too were, how much noise comes out of a facility like this, and you can think about that. How much light would it be emitted from that? That the residents in the area specifically have, complained about some of the lighting from Village of Prominence Point. So, how much overhead lighting and security lighting would need to be there, or would there be parameters on that? Does it fit in that area?
And if you see most.
We felt like there were avenues sorry to cut you off, but we felt like there were avenues to still make that work in there in general, given that we take some of that into consideration and come up with something that doesn't burden the residents that already have homes there.
Most of your lighting with security units are interior on the buildings, shining right down at the parking, so I don't really perceive a lot. But after we had talked there, you were talking about putting something along here, that's nice. And I kind of was doing some thoughts about it. Me and my wife were talking, and I'd actually like to do in your theory of the walkways, because even now, I noticed there is a ton of people that walk up and down 17th Street right there. And then, of course, I gotta put sidewalk in. But I'd like to do it kind of like what you've done over here on 2600 going west, where the road, where it kind of does the curvy thing. And then and I don't know how this works out as far as your streetlights along here, those really nice decorative streetlights, possibly lining that with those. And I don't know who would end up working out that bill for, that. But I kind of got looking at that and thought, yeah, because I don't want it to just look real plain. I'd like it to look halfway decent, but I'd also like it to be more low maintenance. for along there, but I would like it to look halfway decent.
So the other principle that was brought up, and I'm just remembering what we talked about, and I didn't personally necessarily buy into this argument as much, but was that with the density of housing that would be just to the north of it, that those people would possibly need, and I'm making the argument that the planning commission made, this isn't Brandon's theory here, but those people would need a facility like this nearby to store bikes and tools they may have and snow blowers and things like that. When, even if they are just transiently living there, maybe just for a little while before their home builds, then they have, you know, a giant home's worth of stuff, or even if they don't and they just want to keep their antique car somewhere and not in a big parking lot. So those were the principles that were brought up, I think. Did I miss anything?
No.
So I have one other thought that you may want to think about when you look at this entire area as opposed to this individual piece. The next phase of Village at Prominence Point is to extend 300 East all the way to 1700 North, and there'll be some townhomes on either side of that. Then remember, then the apartments are over in this location. The independent living facility is going to be in this location. So the question is, how do we have an appropriate amount of connectivity into this, I'll call it a super block, if you will. You've got 150 East that'll have access at this point on the back side here, but what about through the middle of this? We have a responsibility to make sure that that interior area has the opportunity to someday develop. So something to think about.
That's something we missed in our planning commission discussion. Was that right? Didn't we? I don't think that was discussed.
I wasn't there.
Yeah, I don't think we talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. An excellent point, and something we didn't discuss.
And that's gotta be, you'd have to have, how much width would I lose out of that?
Well, you're coming back 500 feet before you start anyway, right?
Yeah.
So where does that road, where would that road
If
go?
you're talking 1,000 foot back, isn't that what we talked about, because you remember that, we talked about that now. 1,000 foot back, that's gonna put me somewhere probably right in through here. So
If
that's
you pull
gonna
it
cut
down,
me.
John, you can see where 300 East is.
It-
Go the other way.
Yeah, I just bumped it wrong. So it's about where this dirt road is right now is where
So
it's
right
set
here.
to come out.
I mean, in my opinion, we can't budge too much on those parallel streets to Washington that, you know, that they're needed
Yeah.
for traffic. So that's a big one that wasn't considered.
Then that could push me further, come up into here further.
And-
Be able to-
And council, Rob hit on a point and Brandon emphasized it, that north-south connection, because of the way UDOT treats that, there's not lights. There's one at 1700 North, and I don't think there's another light scheduled to go in for, it's not where the townhomes are, I think it's further south. So there's not another way for people to get out and make a left-hand turn through a lit intersection unless they have access to 1700 North from that development, or they'd have to go south down to wherever it punched out in Harrisville.
So just some other land uses that are gonna be happening here. We have a subdivision that's been finalized in this location. It's a junior high? or
Elementary.
Elementary school. It's gonna be in this location here. So, the school district already owns that property and what have you. So they're more than likely at least going to have a portion of that frontage on 150. As far as, those are the uses, other than the ones that Terry's talking about, that have been talked about with us as a city.
Yeah, I have two obstacles or concerns at the moment. One is, as Rob pointed out, don't know how the other storage units got here, but right now it's not a permitted use, right? So that's an obstacle. The other is that this property is not annexed into the city, so I don't know how as a council we can give a nod one way or the other when, right now, it's simply not a permitted use, and that would have to change.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think that's a discussion that council would have to have, whether we want to allow that or not, which is should happen way before we get to this point and giving you a nod one way or the other. I can't give you a nod. Right now, the answer is no, it's not a permitted use. And the second no is you're not even in the city yet. So it's,
Let's see, and I did go to Weber County,
Right.
because I am Weber County. Because of the size of the project, they're telling me anything over 750, I have to propose to the city.
right.
And try and annex
Right.
it. I'm not opposed to annexing it, and that's one of the
Sure.
reasons I'm here, but before I do that, I'd like to get some kind of an idea before I go spend $10,000 for feasibility and my development and costs like that. I'm just trying to get us, some kind of a feel that, yeah, we could possibly do this. This could be something we could do.
So, council
And I
member,
know
as
you can't
part
say
of,
that, yeah, but.
as part of the use issue and what have you, as part of the annexation, we assign the zone, and we also identify an ordinance that goes along with that. So if you were comfortable with allowing for storage units under certain conditions, we could concurrently process that at the same time.
For me, I'm not comfortable giving a nod one way or the other until we've had that discussion about storage units as a whole.
Sure.
As a permitted use or a conditional use or whatever. That's just where I'm standing at the moment. I don't know how the rest of council feels.
Plus you gotta keep that connectivity going through. You can't, shut that off, and then where does it go from the bottom
Right.
up? So, yeah.
Other comments from the council?
Thank you.
John, what do we need to do to begin having that discussion about storage units?
So it would just be a recommendation to the planning commission to look at, are there zones that it's appropriate to add it into? And that's where all land use ordinances would start, is at the planning commission.
Can we get that on their agenda? Start that discussion?
Our preliminary thoughts I gave you tonight, we didn't vote,
Right.
but I think we kind of all ended up agreeing that there's nothing necessarily intrinsically bad about them, if we confront them right. And I think, I would only guess they were probably banned or whatever. Or were they explicitly banned or just never a permitted use?
It's not in our list of uses.
Oh, okay. All right.
So if it's not in there, then it's not allowed.
So which zone would you put them in?
What's that?
Say, which zone would you put them in?
Well, I don't think I could put them in a residential zone with any good conscience, right? So it would have to be in our business zones.
Typically, they're in either heavy commercial or manufacturing.
Industrial
Yeah. Right.
Sure.
Any other comments?
It makes about as walkable of an area as a car wash, really.
I mean, one thing, and this is just, my opinion, but you notice, Terry said he sees people walking that road now and there's nothing there, right? They're walking from the houses out to Washington. So the idea is, if they're going to do it, there are some things you can do to make it more pleasant than not. Obviously, adding sidewalk makes it more pleasant to walk, because you're off the street instead of in the street. So there are some things that can be done.
I know it's not time for fully vetting this out, but, why would something be not an allowed use, right? It would have to be in some way loud or, too noisy or too unpleasant or an odor or, right? Like, these are the reasons we'd make something not an allowed use. And when I just kind of think about this, I think there are ways to control all those, meaning, we did ask the applicant here, if he would be willing to succumb to hours restrictions, meaning so that people weren't banging garage doors and pulling in at night, and I don't think that's a viable business solution for him. Maybe if he opens a storage unit, people need to get to it 24/7, I think is what he said.
Up at 10 o'clock.
So I don't think that's necessarily anything you can't just put a cap on and say he has to close down at 10 to protect the noise in the area. Does it?
And the one down on
Okay.
27th.
Well, I don't know, I don't operate that kind of a business,
No,
but I asked that
it's 10
question to the
o'clock as well,
applicant.
That they cut it off.
Okay, so maybe that's something, as you get into this.
I would think
cutting it off, then you would know who's supposed to be in there and who's not at all hours of the morning.
Well, you can get locked in.
Well, I know, but I'm thinking of more like people getting in that aren't supposed to be there, breaking in and vandalizing from a police point of view. If you're in there after 10, you're not supposed to be.
Right.
And some of these people, some of these operations have a full-time housing component, a manager on site. I don't know if you were thinking about that.
I was,
or not, Karen.
yes.
Some do and some don't, but I can maybe solve some of that.
Or a sign that says no cooking meth in our,
Yeah,
like,
the
what about
sign
that?
will stop it.
The sign says you can't do this, so, like that.
No body disposal.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds like we need to move on. Item 6, discussion on North Ogden City Code rewrite project. Presenter is John Call.
So council, this is just a simple update on where we're at. We did our first RFP for the code rewrite, and we didn't have any single group offer to do everything. And so what we've done is we've selected one group to work on chapters 1 through 10, which is basically everything that isn't land use code. And so they'll work on checking that section for internal conflicts and things like that. They actually came in quite a bit cheaper than we expected, the winning entity. And it'll take about a year to do, but we're gonna move forward with that group, and probably in about 9 months, you can expect to see some more discussion on that. For the land use chapters, we've written a specific RFP just for those, sent it back out to reach out to some of the groups who specialize in land use. And we're waiting for responses on that, but we just wanted to let you know where we were at so that you knew it was still moving along. Any questions about that? Any concerns? Okay, then I win the award for the shortest agenda item.
Thank you, John. Next, we have discussion on housing type comparison. Presenter will be Brandon Bell.
Do you want the presenter? It's by Councilman Swanson.
I'm gonna go ahead and, I know a lot of you have pens, but I don't know if everyone does, so I've got about 6 pens and we'll talk about those and tell you what to do with those. These are from the front desk, so I actually need them back. So, and then this is some copies of the future land use map. We realized that it might be helpful to have some 11 by 17, so if you want to pass the 11 by 17 down as well. So this will work with the team. Oh, you got the screen back there. So kind of as a background to this, John's been working on a modern income housing plan component of the general plan that will be adopted as part of an update that the state is requiring cities to do. And one of the things that we've talked about as staff is that we need to look at areas where different housing types can go. There's significant overlap between housing type and that monitoring. There will need to be in some way some overlap between the housing types and a variety of housing types and modern income housing. But we had a lot of serious discussion tonight, so I wanted to talk about a couple of things. This is one housing type. For start off, it's the Palace at Versailles. It contains 2,300 rooms spread over 6,300 and 154 meters squared. So this is on one end of the spectrum of housing types. It's very, very large, right? And as I was trying to figure out the math on this, we studied this a bit in school. As I was looking at this number, 63,154 square meters, it occurred to me that it wasn't adding up, and I realized that may actually be the square footage of the building footprint itself. I could be wrong, but but there's so many rooms, these 2,300 rooms, that may actually be, and that's, I calculated out, it's about 15 acres. So it's a very large building. I've been saving up for my down payment on this. I think I'm just about there. So, should be moving in shortly. 2,300 rooms, so that's one end of the spectrum. And then this is the other end of the spectrum, tiny homes. So this tiny home is 192 square feet. You can tell that this is a good buy because the look on this gentleman's face, he's super happy in both of these pictures, so you know that that's a good deal. It fits in, it has a full kitchen, has a wash area right here. It has a bedroom up in a loft on the top of it. So, you know, there's a very wide range of housing types. And one thing that, on a serious note, that you'll notice is that both of these are dignified places to live in one way or another. They meet people's needs, and that has a lot to do with housing type, about how you go about deciding what's appropriate. It's not just the housing type itself, but design considerations that make things that we can sometimes consider incompatible. If you can design them right, they actually become quite compatible. And so it's creative thinking like that that helps help this sort of discussion, you know, come up with possibilities about how different housing types can be compatible with one another and how they can work together and fit in the same neighborhoods in many instances. Okay, so what I wanted to do is briefly go through a few different housing types that are out there that exist, that are possibilities. These are the sort of things that can be intermixed with single-family homes. Predominantly, North Ogden City is composed of single-family homes. And so the list that I'm mentioning tonight are those that can commonly be mixed with single-family homes, given that there are certain design considerations that are addressed. So this is these are accessory dwelling units. As you recall, the city recently allowed these basically in all of our R1 zones, as long as certain standards are met. They can't be, it's either 40 or 50% of the main floor if it's attached, or if it's detached. And so you can't overwhelm the space on the property. It has to be subservient, so to speak, to the main home. But there's an easy way to allow density, basically, with low impact. You know, and it's allows that opportunity for homeowners to, you know, if the owner's in one unit on a property in our ordinance, then someone else can live there. It provides sort of a built-in temperament to the making sure that it works well for the neighborhood. This is an example of an accessory dwelling unit. It's not in our city. It is nearby though. You can see the main home. It's coordinated with the design. They have the same design. They're currently redoing their landscape. But this is, you know, this little building right here is that accessory dwelling unit. So it can be on the same property, and it can be designed similarly, and fits into the character of the neighborhood. And one, looks like it's only working on this. It's not moving forward. Oh. So we'll just look at this one for now. Just one note as I went through this presentation that I think might be helpful. There's many different ways to do each of these housing types. We're only looking at one or two examples of each housing type, but there's a lot of different configurations for each housing type, and I'll go into a little more detail about what I mean by that in just 1 second, a couple housing types down in the presentation. This next is townhouse or row house. They're, you know, homes that basically have no side yard and they share a side wall with other homes. In technical terms, the main difference between a townhouse and a row house is that sometimes the word townhouse is used to mean these row houses that don't have a backyard. Typically when you talk about a row house, they have a backyard. So you look at lot sizes, they can be anywhere from 18 feet wide to some are wider, maybe up to 35 feet or approximately wide. And so you're getting a much narrower lot configuration, you're getting much larger, much smaller lot sizes than you would get in our R1 zones. I think our lowest is 8,000, well, and then we have now an R15 zone that has a 5,000 square foot lot size. So you're probably looking at somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 square foot lots. 6,000 is probably big. These are some examples of townhouses. You'll see that they are similar to single-family homes in that they have the yard, the front yard in the front, they have a walk-up in this instance that goes to the doors. You'll see this one on the right is a close-up where, it's very similar in a lot of ways to a single-family home configuration, but allows people at different price points and budgets to be able to fit into a neighborhood. This is another example. This one is in our city. The last one was not. This is the Ranches Phase 2. A little bit different of configuration. The homes front onto one another, and so this picture is essentially taken from the street. They're perpendicular to the street, and they share a walk. And then this is just an example of some open space that they share behind them. So these allow people to have the same sort of dignity and respect for themselves, to live in these dwelling units that are lower price point but offer many of the same amenities that single-family homes do. The next is a small house on a small lot. We often tend to think of, when we think of single-family homes, we think of just simply maybe 8,000 square foot and larger, maybe up to 12,000 or half-acre lots. But it is possible to do a single-family home that's smaller, with maybe a 3 to 5 foot setback on each side, totaling so there's somewhere between 6 and 10 feet between the homes. You're going to have a narrower lot configuration in this option, and you're going to have maybe between, again, a 4,000 and 8,000 square foot lot. 8's probably a little bit large, but somewhere around there. And we do have some of these in our neighborhoods. Before we move on to an example, in our city, before we move on to one of those examples, I just want you to notice that one way to do these that's not shown in the picture is to use this narrower lot configuration. That presents a lot of possibilities. So this is an example in our city. We recently adapted, I can't remember, it used to be the Legacy or Legacy North zone, I think, and we just sort of generalized that zone so it was available in other areas to the R15 zone. This is one of those lots. It's a little deceiving, the picture. I think it's a 20-foot drive, and so it's approximately a 20-foot setback as opposed to a 30-foot setback. And then it's hard to see in this picture, but where this lot gets smaller is that you'll see that there's maybe 15, maybe 20 feet between the backs of these homes. And so they've got a much smaller yard on this, and that allows for there to be the smaller lot size. But again, it's less land, so it brings down the cost of living for the people in this neighborhood. It provides them a lot of the same opportunities as larger lots, but at a lower price point and cost to their budget. The next is the cottage court. These are really great ways to provide people an opportunity to have, again, similar amenities and lifestyle as single-family home living, but at a lower cost. And what you'll see here is they all, the individual units will front onto a courtyard, a shared green space, and then sometimes in this configuration you see individual units with a side setback between them, maybe 5 to 10 feet, probably closer than 10, but maybe up to it. But sometimes what you can also do is join the buildings and turn them into small multi-unit buildings, so you have 2 or 3 units per building, and that allows to get a little bit more units. They're great for young couples and people starting out, so that they can have this quality of lifestyle, but not at the budget. This is an example actually from one of the historic neighborhoods in Ogden. This is you've got, I think, 2 units in this building right here. They're divided in this area near the chimney. And then you've got a separate building back at the rear. I can't remember how many units it has, but I think it's 2 units in that as well. There's a walkway that goes between the buildings at the back, and they have this shared courtyard. There's a fountain here in the center and a lot of hedges and plant life. And then this is the parking, actually. This photo is actually to the north of this photo, so the parking in this photo, if it extended, would be over on this side. You pull in around the rear, there's parking spaces. And then on this side, if this photo extended further to the right, it would, you'd see another building like this that faces opposite to this one. So this isn't exactly a townhome. I just referred to as attached units. This is an example in our city. It's from Cherry Springs Villas. And I just wanted to give an example that this is, a lot of the similar lifestyle as single-family units, but this is specifically an age-restricted community. But it's not something that this sort of design form for a building isn't something that needs to necessarily be restricted to an age-restricted community. In fact, we do have, I think it's our PRUD ordinance, Rob can maybe chime in if I'm wrong, we do have a provision for attached units in our code. We've not yet used it, and it doesn't specify how many, like the limit of number of units that you can attach. And we just found that probably within the last month or so, brought to our attention. But it's similar to single-family homes in that they all front onto a sidewalk. There's the front yard that they have, but it brings lot sizes and therefore costs down. Again, small multi-unit buildings. Going back to one of my comments starting out about design considerations, basically one of the common design principles that you want to use when you look at these types of buildings and seeing if they can fit is you want to design them in with similar features architecturally so that they fit into a single-family neighborhood if that's where you're looking at putting them, and then also the scale of them. So back at this cottage court, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm just going to say you have 3 on this back building. So you've got 9 units there. But what makes them more compatible than other forms of apartments or things like that is the scale of the building. If a building has similar architectural features as a single-family home, and it has a similar scale, or in other words, size to a home, then it makes it a lot easier for that building to fit into a neighborhood that is primarily single-family. So one of the terms that I've learned as I've studied planning is there's 2 terms. There's house scale and block scale. Buildings generally fall under those 2 categories of house scale and block scale. That doesn't mean that if it's house scale, it has to be a single-family home. It just means it looks and feels at a similar size and space to do that. And so by dividing these buildings up, these units up, each individual building, in this case, stay at a house scale, and then in this case, because they're smaller, let's see if I can get back to it. Oh, we'll look over here on the TV behind John. These are still at a house scale. Sorry, little technology difficulties. The yellow, I'll just say this, the yellow, I can't think of the architectural.
Cottage. Are they cottage?
They're cottage, but I'm trying to think of the architectural. And the yellow stucco units are still at a building scale that's house scale, right? Because they're smaller units, and so they have a footprint that's similar to an actual home. This unit right here is interesting. It's actually also still at house scale, but what's interesting about it, there's actually 4 units in that building, okay? And then if you look at this, going back to the point about architectural features, this looks and feels like a single-family home. It's on a street that is, to my recollection, this is actually near my home. It's the only unit that I can think of on this street that is a duplex. Actually, there might be one other, except for on the same street are the cottages that shared on the courtyard. They're across the street. So those are the 2 buildings that I know for sure on the street out of 10 or 14 homes that are not single. All the others are single-family homes. And this is actually, even though it looks like a single-family home, it's not. You'll see there's a door right here and there's a door right here. That is actually a duplex technically. But because of the design considerations, it fits in the character of the neighborhood. And so it allows opportunities for those of varying incomes to being a part of the neighborhood and the opportunities that come with that. This is another example. It's mansion home apartments. This is still at house scale. This is reasonably the size that someone could build a single-family home. It's 2 stories, but it's what's called a mansion home apartment. Now, I don't know the number of units in here. I would guess that there's maybe 4 units in there, possibly more. Typically, they have usually one visible entrance. It looks like a single-family home. It's been designed to look like a single-family home. And again, I've stated it's probably approximately 3 to 6 units. And so a lot of these things come not so much in the exact use sometimes, but what gets you a lot of the way towards being compatible in a single-family home neighborhood is the design characteristics of it. So this is another example of a mansion home apartment. I don't know the number of units. This is actually, both of these are out in Daybreak, but they're, again, you've got a lot of architectural features, the gables, the dormers. It's 2 stories, a main entrance. I think there's a second entrance over there. You've got porches, and then more detailed architectural things going on with symmetry that help it feel like a single-family home. And then this is probably actually a variation on the same design, just a different architectural detailing on the exterior of the building. But these are referred to as mansion home apartments. And so again, this is probably pushing the limit of it, this actual building, but it's still at home scale. If you want to understand block scale buildings, this is kind of an extreme example, but if you think about looking at the back of Smith's, and it's a wall, it's very long, and there's nothing softening it like a sloped roof. That's when you start to when you get buildings that are squares and don't have sloped roofs of some sort, and they're more than 2 stories, you're entering something closer to block scale, and they tend to take up either the whole block, there's no softening to them in the building, the whole facade just hits right at the street, something like that. So I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of these types of housing types, and the reason why I've passed around the land use maps is, and John can weigh in and share what he wants to about the moderate income housing plan. The state's has given cities a mandate that we have to have that in our general plan, particularly for certain types of funding from the state, I believe. And so the city has to figure out, how do we provide that housing? Well, practically speaking, from a design perspective, the way you get there is through different housing types. And so what we're inviting you to do is to take a look at the future land use map and identify areas where you feel like pockets of these, or either larger areas of different housing types could fit other than just single-family homes, what you feel like a good fit is. John, did you want to make any comments on?
Are these on about 1/4 of an acre each one of them, or?
Of these that were shown?
Yeah.
No, many of them would be much smaller than a 1/4 acre. 1/4 acre is kind of a typical single-family home lot, and so in order to get cheaper costs, you'd have to use smaller amounts of land than a 1/4 acre per unit, much smaller. So John, did you have any comments on how this ties into the moderate income housing plan?
So I think Rob was going to talk a little bit about infill as well when I'm done, but the idea is, as the planning, or as the general plan committee makes a recommendation to these 2 groups for the adoption of the general plan, there's the option for them to then go one step further and take this future land use map and actually draw little boxes and say, hey, you know what, we're going to do courthouses in this area, or we're going to do legacy type developments in this area. One of the things that would do in the long term is create chances for moderate income housing homes, create them in some areas where they might have been larger lots, to allow some community support for individuals who are maybe on the lower side of income scale, but in a small enough amount that you don't end up with large areas of depressed housing, for example. The best example of kind of a mix of housing I can think of in Utah that most people are familiar with is the avenues. You'll go from a Victorian style home that's a single family home, 6,000 square feet, right next to a 2 or 3 story apartment building, right next to a duplex, and there's a lot of things going on in that neighborhood that make it dynamic and interesting. And not saying that we should be that, but is there an opportunity? And so I think this map that you've been given is kind of a homework. Think about it. Is there areas that you can do it? And in particular, are there areas of the city where there isn't development, and as it comes in that you see it happening, so that way the people who are buying into those neighborhoods already know what's going to be there because it's on the plan as part of their subdivision. So maybe some of the future subdivisions, and I don't know this is the best idea, it's just an idea, but a subdivision says, okay, you're gonna have 80 lots, 20 of them will be half acre, 20 of them are quarter acre, 20 of them are sixth of an acre, and then you'll have some fourplexes, or I don't know. I mean, it's just, the idea is that a fit for North Ogden? And if not, then that's fine too. It's just, we just wanted to have the conversation. One thing I really don't like about this map is the whole city is yellow. And it's not because I don't think we should have a lot of single-family housing. I feel like we should be more specific. So we should identify where the R110 zones are and where the R12 zones are and the RE20 zone on this map, and pick the areas that are empty where there's not houses and assign a specific density to them now, so that we don't end up in a constant battle with developers coming in and saying, I want denser and denser housing. We can say, no, the map says you get this, that's what you get. So that we can do the planning now and have the battle now instead of in the future. The caveat to that is then the neighbors lose the battle in the future. The people who want it to remain a field, if we say, oh, it's going to be 10,000 square foot lots, then that's kind of what you're promising that landowner is someday it's going to be 10,000 square foot lots. And so that can cause some conflicts in the future when the decision is made, in theory, 2 or 3 years ahead of the time the developer shows up to develop the land. But it also gives the opportunity to say, we need to have some open space in this. You could draw a bigger box and say, in this area, we don't know which of these pieces is going to be a park, but we want one here. And that, helps guide those decisions in the future. So, sorry. And Rob, you have.
Thanks, John. One of the things that you've all been taught about when you start talking about land, you should talk about public clamor, you talk about NIMBY, all of these kinds of things. That's the significance really of having a general plan that everybody gets behind, so that those discussions are held at a high level and that then can become a reality as property owners have something that they can count on going forward. One of the interesting things, I worked for Ogden City many years ago, and I'd forgotten this, but we had an ordinance that was created called residential infill. And this specific ordinance, what it does is that it allows for areas that have unique circumstances with either boundaries, size, frontage, all those kinds of things. Central City Ogden was divided up into 10-acre blocks. And then as property owners, I'm sure you've been around in downtown, the old part of Ogden, that you have streets that don't go through the whole block. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have these little lanes or whatever that kind of carve all of that up. So the ordinance that was created is called residential infill. And we're getting to the point, we've still got a lot of what is termed as green space, as far as lots of big lots or big parcels that can be turned into subdivisions and that, but we're starting to get some areas where there's some real challenges to that one-size-fits-all R18, R110 standard to be able to make effective use of the land in that. A couple years ago, you'll recall that there was a discussion about flag lots, and one of the big concerns was the whole idea of somebody's front yard is somebody's backyard, that type of thing. So there's some unique circumstances that are there. This particular ordinance, what it does is that it provides flexibility with respect to the Planning Commission to be able to address some of those, and in a sense make modifications so that so that there can be an effective development that is reasonable for that particular area. So that's another one that we're contemplating. We've got lots of opportunity as this land use development code unfolds and what have you to address these kinds of things. You know, we've got a really good team here to be able, I think, to recognize the unique circumstances of our city, as well as we have people that are caring as far as our policymakers here, planning commission, and council, and mayor. So we look forward to seeing this unfold and start to share some of these things with you so that you can start thinking about them.
Thank you, Rob. Anything else, Brandon?
No, I guess I'm sad that John left. He was the one that asked that I bring the maps, and so I don't know if he wants to provide any recommendations tonight or not. Okay. So I guess just take the map and think about areas that you think that it might work, where pockets can, pockets of alternate housing type units can be appropriately located in the city.
So in the future, we may end up doing a field trip or something like that, where we can kind of give some examples again. And again, this isn't set in stone by any means. It's an opportunity to really reflect on it. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, the next item is, I don't know whether the planning commission wants to stay.
Oh, you guys got this.
No, I really want their opinion on this.
Really? Goats? I'm all in favor.
Goats and dogs.
I had 3 in my backyard 2 weeks ago.
Goats?
Yeah. I wasn't gonna weed that dog well myself.
So you rented goats, huh?
I did.
Thank you all.
I don't know if it was legal.
Thank you. Item 8, discussion on goats and increase of dogs allowed. Presenter will be Council Member Swanson.
Council, I brought this up a couple of months back, having been reached out to by a number of residents in the city that were asking about the possibility of pygmy goats being an allowed, a permitted pet, if you will. And so let's start with that one. What I've learned in the ensuing 2 months is that the predominance of there being goats that are quiet is pretty small. John's goats are pretty, but they're not pygmy goats either. They're a Syrian goat or something like that. The pygmies, talked to a number of individuals, I talked to some folks up at Utah State. They tend to be pretty noisy. Are they noisier than barking dogs? Not typically. But they tend to be noisy for long, long periods of time. Many, many hours during the day, which does happen with dogs on occasion, but not as much as the feeling I'm getting with the pygmy goats. Questions?
Is there, somebody told me there's a difference if you got 2 goats, they seem to be more quiet than 1 goat.
The folks I talked to at Utah State said yes and no. I've been to a few places where there are multiple pygmy goats together, and they were quite noisy. I've been to others where there was a single goat and it was quite quiet. So I think where I've gotten to on the idea with the goats is that I don't know that it's a can of worms we want to open.
There's already goats in the city. So what are you looking at? And what are you talking about?
This would be
Quarter-acre lots?
any lot, any zone. Yeah, you can, RE20, if there's an acre or more, you can have goats. And that's not the issue. The issue has been asked because of the size of pygmy goats and the increasing popularity of them as pets. Some individuals have asked, can we have these pygmy goats? They're smaller than many of the dogs that we have at many of the houses. They're smaller than my 2 dogs.
Phil?
Yes, sir.
There's quite a few small goats right by Hall's Fruit Farm. Did you notice that?
Yeah, that's probably an RE20 where they're allowed.
Or agriculture.
Or in agriculture, yeah. This was more, not more, this was looking at your traditional residential zones, R18, R110, R12. And what I found over the last, since we last talked about this, it's not something that I would recommend to you. You may feel differently and we can move forward with that, but it's, after what I've seen and heard and been told, I don't think it's a direction that we're, as a city, ready to head to.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I do live where goats are allowed, and I did have a neighbor that had a pygmy goat. And it so happens that their backyard butts up to my side yard. And it was very noisy, and we were constantly calling because they had it on a chain. We were either jumping the fence to release it from its chain, see that it had water, or calling them to say, your goat's got problems. And also, we had another neighbor that had bigger goats, and they ruined everything. I mean, if you don't have a good chain link fence, they ate all the trees, they ate all the wood on the posts of the fence.
I don't think llamas count. But traditional, as you go through the city, you'll see that